just now, our past president, Sri Rumta said, sir, how do you keep so fit? I mean, so he's handsome, he's fit, he's intelligent, and overall, he's now the permanent advisor to the Prime Minister of India. So that's Mr. Sanyal. So he needs a plea. I recently came to know that he was in a class with my nephew for 11 years in Calcutta. 8 or 11 years, I don't remember. So he was in Calcutta, 8 years in Calcutta, and he has been a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, and for 2 decades till 2015, he was a global strategist and managing director of Dushat Bank. His great-grandfather, also Mr. N. Sanyal, who was, this is very important, was the chief whip of the Congress in the Provincial Assembly of Undivided Bengal. So therefore, he has this background of lineage of the politicians also in the family. But most important, sir, we always love when somebody from Bengal, holds such important position. And I was told by my secretary that, you would like to speak only for 30-35 minutes. And you'll be very keen to take the question and answer session. Sir, I was given this note at about 8 o'clock in the evening. But sir, the lawyers don't work on Friday evening. So yesterday, I didn't get a chance to read this note. And today I had to miss my gym because I wanted to read this note. And normally, when a note comes to me, I make some additions, which I have not been able to do. So since I did not receive the note yesterday morning, I made some points myself, which I thought how my views are on this situation, because you are going to speak on how do we make India as known as Sone Ki Chidiya in the next 25 years. That's the theme of today's subject. And there is no doubt, sir, that it is going to happen, because you are so correct when you said that during COVID-19, when you were addressing us, you are so correct that we are going to have a V-shaped economy. We had number of speakers during COVID-19, and they said that you need to transfer money to poor people, to the people at large, to get out of this mess out of COVID-19. But you were right in the sense you said no. Our package, which we have given on account of food security, Narega, and all other social services which you provided to the public at large who were affected by COVID, came true that it was the money transfer was not necessary. In fact, we had Mr. Gurumurthy, who was the advisor. He was very vocal on this, that no, we have to transfer money. I mean, and so many economists, were of the view that what we are doing is very little. But you were firm in your view, and you said we are going to have a V-shaped recovery, and this is what actually happened.
Now we have an inflation problem.
Yeah. So thanks for that. And I'm sure, sir, there was a study that how do we, because we were suffering from poverty, and the recent IMF report said that we have been able to wipe out the extreme poverty. But then we still suffer from poverty. And he said, what is the mantra to remove poverty? What is the mantra? Because a lot of people say that we suffer from poverty, we suffer from unemployment, we suffer from growth. So mantra for all, I mean, mantra for growth is consumption. Mantra for growth is mantra for removal of poverty is growth, and mantra for eradication of unemployment is growth. So therefore, it's growth, 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 and without growth, you cannot grow, or you cannot eradicate what we are suffering from. But sir, today there are 2-3 issues which I thought I must talk to you about, because we have gone out of the taken a lot of, we are out of this COVID fear and fear psychosis which suffered from COVID. But at present, sir, let's talk about not about 25 years. I think for the first time, we are going through a very unprecedented crisis. This unprecedented crisis is all over the world. Uh, the world is suffering from shortage of food. The world is suffering from increase in the commodity prices and increase in the logistic cost. Uh, I don't know, sir. I mean, we say that today there was a report which RBI says that we are not going to go to get into stagflation, but the recent World Bank report has come out with a world report, and they have cautioned the risk of stagflation with the potential harmful consequences on the low income and middle income group countries. So this is something which we are really worried about. In the last, I would say, after the onset of monsoon, which was, we are deficit to the extent of 32%. So how do we tackle this unprecedented crisis? I mean, this is one issue which I felt. The second issue which I felt was, which we need to have your views, because we are very, very worried about it, that two of our most important neighbors, Sri Lanka and Pakistan, there is not only a bankruptcy, but there is a total political uncertainties in these two countries. And they are very, very important as far as we are concerned, because they are two very important neighbors for us. The other 2 points, sir, which I wanted to take was, if we want to become a $5 trillion economy, your view was that we will be able to achieve it by 2024, 2025. Now, the recent report is that we will be able to do it by 2027, 28. I think, sir, we can do it much faster. I mean, the way we got into V-shaped recovery with our spirit of enterprise, I think what we really need to do something which is not very much fiscal. I have two suggestions which I would like to. One is, sir, that we are over-regulated. I mean, actually, I had no knowledge. I was, when I said that I was making my note yesterday, I came through one of the report. This report is by you, because you may ask me this question, what you are saying, how did you know that? So this is an Observers Research Foundation report. And it went on to say that there is 26,134 imprisonment clauses on non-compliance of business law. Absolutely. I mean, you are absolutely right, sir. I mean, this was figure which really stunned me. And I must give compliment to the present government that they have been able to, as far as the company law is concerned, other legislation is concerned, they have been able to decriminalize many of the provisions. But for any businessman to know that, there are 26,134 clauses which can have imprisonment clauses will scare you to a lot. I mean, I don't know. And the other thing was that there are, and this is what the total compliance of various laws. I'm not saying one particular industry, but the total compliance law, which also said, was over 69,235. So this was one issue which I don't want to go into detail. I have many figures on that. In fact, the FICCI submitted a report 2 years back on the over-regulation and how many there are regulatory filings and how many, and very important issues are as a, I mean, it's good for a lawyer and a chartered accountant. I'm a lawyer, and it's good that, there are too many laws. So people are totally confused. And the study is that the 8 rules change every day. There are 8 rules which change every day, and 2,500 compliance change every year. So what I'm only trying to say, sir, what we need is basically ease of living and also ease of doing business. I don't want the migration of our industrialists to take place. I don't want our professionals who pass out from our universities, IIT, and to go out and work. And I think we must create an atmosphere And we have that atmosphere. We have created that atmosphere. Uh, our this 21st century, they say it's a digital world. It's a century of artificial intelligence. Uh, it's a century of e-commerce, and it's our technicians who are running the businesses in America. Who are our technicians who are so well versed, so knowledgeable. We have all the talents here. What we basically need is ease of living and ease of doing business. Basically, that's the most important thing I felt I would like to take. The other thing which I want to say, sir, there's phobia. Sir, one of our past president is here, sir. I didn't introduce you, Mr. Sajan Bajaj is here, a very important person. The other point which I wanted to take was, sir, sir, a unthinkable step was taken by the present dispensation on reducing the rate of income tax. For the new industries, it was reduced to 15%. For old industries, if you don't take exemption, it was reduced to 25%. And sir, what effect it had? It had a unbelievable impact. The India Inc. profit during COVID times in 21-22 was double. Your direct tax collection and indirect tax collection have risen to unprecedented level of 27.1 lakh crore. And if you read today's newspaper, this quarter, the profit has gone up by more 45%. So therefore, you can see, sir, that the result on the reduction of taxes is giving you more revenue. So why can't this be further extended to partnership firms and to also LLP who are doing businesses? I mean, companies are doing businesses, but at the same time, we have number of firms, partnership firms in India, small. In fact, sir, the entrepreneurs, most of the entrepreneurs, because of the regulatory compliance, they do business in terms of through partnership firms, and they do through limited liability partnership, because you have to otherwise comply with regulatory compliance. So I felt, sir, that if we could also think about giving some thought on having a reasonable rate of tax on partnership firms and on LLP. I'm not talking on individuals, of course. It can be thought about, but I'm not really going on to that aspect of the matter. So the other is, we have seen the crisis. We always said that the manufacturing is the mantra and the service is the mantra to make us grow, make us rich, get out of the poverty. But this Ukraine crisis has shown us the importance of agriculture. I mean, the wheat, the two countries fighting, Russia and Ukraine, and there is a wheat crisis all over the world. It's not available. So agriculture is also a very, very important part of the economy, which need to be modernized. And we have to not only grow in manufacturing, which we said today we are very low, 14%, but we must take some steps to take it to 25%. What steps we are going to take is, well, actually, so the business actually depends upon you give a handle, when small children are there and they grow, because it depends upon their parents, how they bring up their child. So similarly, for the citizen of this country, the responsibility lies with you or people as to how you create an environment, because it's the environment in our house which makes the child happy. So it is an environment of regulatory environment and a political environment and other kinds of things which make us grow. So therefore, I felt that was very important. The third is, sir, which I felt was the result of the Ukraine crisis, was that Atmanirbhar Bharat. We have to secure ourselves militarily. And for that, it's time that we start indigenously manufacturing defense production. I was talking the other day to the GOC in Eastern Command, And everybody is now wants that, the private sector must get into the defense production. Sir, I still remember the time when we were not doing so good in export. Today we are doing so good in export that the income made from export was exempted from income tax. Is it not a high time that we consider that any person who goes into the defense production, and most of the industries, MSME will go into the defense production. That's what I've been told by the authorities whom I met. And is it not a high time for us to consider to say that we become self-sufficient as far as the defense production is concerned, and look into that? Sir, I thought these were few points which I thought I would like to address you on. So with these words, sir, may I request you to address our members with your views, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khaitan. Let me say right in the beginning, I can't say that I approve of the fact that you missed your gym because you are reading my CV. Next time, skip the CV, go to the gym. So, thank you, Bharat Chamber of Commerce, for welcoming me back here after the COVID situation. I think I did address you over online during the crisis, and of course things have moved on since then. So the crux of my talk today was the reform agenda for the next 25 years. So that's of course important to do that because we are of course at our 75th year of independence. And we are also 30 years since we started liberalizing and reforming our economy. So this is a good time to think about the larger picture. Many of the issues that you discussed just now, I will take those into account, but the crux of my talk is not really about the here and now, although I will be quite happy to discuss them in our interactions as well. But just sort of to respond to some of the issues, I generally agree with almost all the points you made about ease of living, ease of doing business, and so on. That's a policy for our government. That's a policy officially put together by, pushed by our Honorable Prime Minister as well. Many of these terms are commonly used in many of his speeches. So, we do agree with that. Let me also say that while you said that there's unprecedented crisis, let me say that the world is always an unprecedented something or the other. And much of my talk about the next 25 years is about the fact that the world is never in equilibrium. So, the idea that there is uncertainty is actually the constant. And there is no such thing as a new normal. And much of what I will talk about will be about this issue. How do you make policy in the world of uncertainty? But just to respond to some of the things of the here and now, the fact is that many of the policies we took during the 2 years in crisis have meant that despite the shock of the crisis, the Indian economy has emerged from this largely stronger than what it was going into it. Our financial and banking system, for example, is actually better now than it was before the crisis. In contrast to many forecasts that we would have a banking crisis, etc., and so on, and it did indeed happen in many countries, including some around us. But our financial system has come out well. In many ways, our supply side of our economy, the productive efficiency of our economy, is actually better now. A lot of this happened because of the hard work we put in before the crisis. The cleaning up of the banks, for example, meant that the banking system went into this crisis reasonably under-leveraged and relatively cleaned. If we had gone into this crisis with the banking system we had in 2015, it would have been quite a different picture. But because we had put together the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and so on, so consequently, a significant part of the cleaning up had happened. Now, of course, such cleaning up is always painful when we do it, but that pain had already to some extent been taken in 16, 17, 18. So even in 19, so when we went into 2020 with this crisis, we were an under-leveraged system. An over-leveraged system going into a shock like what we did during COVID would have been a real problem from which we may not have easily been able to recover. Similarly, we had done the painful business of introducing the GST system and other tax reforms. No matter when we did it, it would have been very complicated and painful to do, but it was more or less done by the time we had entered into this COVID. Net result, again, we just when we needed extra resources through this, that system began to kick in. We were on the other side where the benefits began to flow. So as a result of which, again, you can see that despite the shock, actually our direct tax revenues and indirect tax revenues have done reasonably well. Surprisingly well to many people, but not surprising to those of us who had pushed for exactly this reform for this reason. Many of you had to suffer, unfortunately, through the pain of the introduction. But let me say that whenever we introduced it, it would have been painful. But now that we are on the other side, I hope that some of you appreciate why it needed to be done. And it was not a moment too soon, because it just happened at the moment and we have been able to benefit, as a result of which, let's say, our macroeconomic stability of this country and the productive capacity of this economy is in much better shape than you can imagine. Imagine what this would have happened with a system that was off balance and $120 a barrel oil prices on a sustained basis, energy, food prices in the world going spiraling up. It's not that this is not painful to us, it is. But the fact is that, while we cannot be dislinked from the shock of the rest of the world, inflation is gone up, but it's ironically below where it is in the US, for example. And it is true that dramatic withdrawal of liquidity by the US Fed has implications for us as well, but which is happening in a reasonably orderly manner. We have large foreign exchange reserves, which, if necessary, we can easily allow it to burn, if necessary, in order to keep cushion the system. Why have foreign exchange reserves? Well, because you can use it during times you need, and we have the capacity to do it. Similarly, whether it's the fiscal or monetary side, we have space to be able to absorb a lot of the shock. So I would say that we are in a good place. Sure, there are global difficulties, but I think we can make a reasonable claim that we are in a position to deal with that, and we have an internal market that is in a good enough position to be able to take it. Now, my talk is not about the here and now. It is about the next 25 years. And the most important thing to know about the next 25 years is that there's going to be a lot of uncertainty about it. So if I had come here and given you a very detailed plan about how the next 25 years was going to pan out, or in fact, if any subsequent speaker ever does this, please just throw them out. Because essentially they don't know what they're talking about. The most important thing about long time periods, and even short time periods sometimes, is that we deal with a very uncertain future. And consequently, how do we make policy for an uncertain future? Because do remember that even in January 2020, nobody knew how the world was going to turn out to be. So how on earth do I know what will happen over the next 25 years? Even technologists who claim to know how their technologies are going to actually pan things out, if you went back 25 years, they were all very excited about something called Y2K, remember? Essentially, nothing happened, right? So just because somebody does something in technology doesn't mean they understand what they're doing. Even the inventors of a certain technology very often do not understand the implications of what they are doing. So given that we have so much uncertainty, how do I make policy? And I've talked a little bit about this in my earlier talks, but still bear with me again, because I want to reiterate this point. Much of 20th century economics was built on the basis of mechanical engineering worldview, a Newtonian worldview, which basically is a deterministic worldview. The worldview is, if only you created a very detailed plan of the machine, then you'll know what's going to happen in the future and you can plan how the path will be. If the last one failed, then you have an even more detailed one that will take you forward. And so our entire thinking is, you'll keep regularly hearing, plan bahut acha tha, lekin implementation kharab tha. Now, how do you know if the plan was acha if the outcome was bad? All of you run businesses. If you when your business goes wrong, do you spend all your time thinking about something that was my business plan good, or was my response to the problems that arose unpredictably was good? That is what you should think about, not about whether or not whether your original business plan was good or in the implementation of it was bad. That is not what you think about. So unfortunately, the entire basis of economics for the 20th century was based on this great idea that there was something called an equilibrium. And now notice that equilibrium is a Newtonian term from Newtonian mechanics. In fact, most of the terms you use in economics comes from there. You'll hear a word like liquidity. You'll hear words like levers of fiscal and monetary policy. So the impression is that there is some rail track on which this steam engine is running. And if the steam engine is going too slowly, you put in a little bit more coal into the engine. If it's going too fast, you pull the brake. You can see the mental image is still steam engine. And supposing and it is running on one track, which is called the trajectory. And if supposing the trajectory changes, you call it the new normal. But it is still another rail line. But this worldview has in it this idea that the whole economy is a gigantic machine, and that you can predict where this machine is going to go. Maybe the track will change a little bit here or a little bit there, and where this machine will go. But the problem is that the economy is not such a machine. It's actually an adaptive, complex, chaotic system being given all kinds of shocks. It may be political shocks, technological shocks, demographic shocks. Occasionally, some of it may be predictable, but large parts of it are not predictable. So because of this problem of prediction, all kinds of deterministic, rigid planning will always fail. That is the reason the Soviet Union collapsed. That is the reason our entire effort between 1950s to 1991 of planning failed. It was not because we needed even wiser people sitting in the planning commission. The fact is, it does not matter. The wisdom of those people didn't matter. The whole idea of that kind of planning is itself wrong. That after 1991, when we began doing reforms over the last 25 years, was correctly allowed to move into a more market-based system. But that market-based system that we more or less most of the reforms were done was based on a framework of thinking which is called the Washington Consensus or neoliberalism. But note that that market-based system also has in it a conception that there is some optimal equilibrium. So the socialist system has the idea that there is this optimal equilibrium, and wise men sitting in the planning commission know where this equilibrium is and they can herd you to it. The Washington Consensus is of the view that there is also an optimal equilibrium. It's just that the markets take you there. Notice that they are very close cousins, because they're both based on the idea that there is an optimal equilibrium and that it can be discovered in some fashion. What if there is, in fact, no optimal equilibrium? That you are in a complex, adaptive, chaotic system where there is, in fact, no equilibrium to aspire for. And that is really the economics that I want to talk to you about today. Because when you're talking about 25 years, that is what you have to think about. Mr. Khaitan talked about unprecedented. And it is true that the COVID crisis specifically is unprecedented. But the fact that you have these shocks is hardly unprecedented. You go back 10 years, and if I was sitting in, so the COVID crisis in 2020, Let me take you back to 2010. And I asked you, were you in equilibrium then? I said, no, we had just had the global financial crisis. You would have said unprecedented. Go back another 10 years to that. You would have said, oh my God, we're going to have the COVID, Y2K crisis, which didn't happen. So the one thing people had predicted didn't actually happen. But what did you have? You had at that time had the Asian crisis, the dot-com bubble burst, all kinds of, and then of course, 9/11. Was that equilibrium? No. Go back another 10 years to that. You had the Berlin Wall collapsing, Soviet Union collapsed. Our own economy fell apart and we had to do the economic reforms. Was that the new normal? Or go back another 10 years. You had the second oil crisis, the invasion of Afghanistan. The point I'm making to you is the fact that the economies are buffeted by shocks is the common thing. Everything is unprecedented. So let's not waste our time thinking about what is unprecedented. We have to create systems if we are thinking in long terms. When we are thinking beyond dealing with the immediate problems of the crisis, we have to think about creating systems that actually can deal with the unprecedented and with the uncertainty, because that is actually what systems have to be planned for, in a sense. You cannot plan for actual events, but you can plan for the fact that you will get some kind of random shock is going to come and hit you. So if that is what we need to think about, that let me say that it is a waste of my time to tell you, artificial intelligence will do well or will not do well, or what will the impact of this. I have no idea how that will pan out. In fact, if I did know, I shouldn't be telling you about it, because I should be investing in the stock market and becoming Elon Musk. So any great economist comes and tells you how the future is going to work out in detail, please be extremely suspicious of him. Now, having said that, so what can you do as a policymaker about the future? So in that, let me say that the last 25 years was mostly about withdrawing the government from stopping doing the things it should not be doing. So when we said reforms, it meant liberalization, i.e. the withdrawal of government. So ending license permit Raj, privatization, we have finally begun doing it. Withdrawing the government from, essentially all the things it shouldn't do. The next 25 years, however, is about something different. Now, I'm not saying that we have completed that thing. There are clearly, Mr. Khaitan told me, a long list of grievances, and we need to take care of that. And there's no doubt that all this criminalization of minor clauses, all in the Companies Act and everywhere, we need to sort that out. But I don't think, at least from the theory perspective, there is a disagreement. Practice of it needs to be still done. We still need to do many other things. But the time has come to think about what is the theory of what we need to do in the future. So in the next 25 years, the things we need to do are related to what we definitely will need in the system. What should the Indian state do in the next, actually do, i.e. the things the Indian state should deliver. Now, highest up in that list would be the ability of the Indian state to enforce contract and deliver justice. This should be the number one reform of the next 25 years. There's no point in having a market-based system unless we can enforce contracts on time. Having 4 lakh cases stuck in our legal system is indefensible. Now we can debate whose fault it is, what we want to reform, all of those other debates we can have. But this is the single biggest reform that we need to do. Getting our legal system to deliver the goods. One of the major reasons many of our laws are so complicated is because we are trying very hard, or at least the policymakers are trying very hard to be extremely prescriptive in the hope that it doesn't have to go to the courts. Now, this is a pointless way of solving this problem. Because as I said, the future cannot be predicted. Therefore, it is not possible for any policymaker, no matter how great a genius he is or how great a bureaucrat he is, to be able to predict all the circumstances in which those laws will be applied. So complicating them ever more by trying to work out every single circumstances in which it will have to be applied is also consequently a waste of time. In fact, as you complicate the law, you in fact create more discretion. There is a bizarre belief in India, particularly, but among bureaucrats around the world, that if you had worked out every outcome and you work out what should be done in every single case, you will remove discretion. In fact, the opposite happens, because now what happens is, because whatever actually happens will never fall into any neat bucket. And the more discretions and details you create, the more the ability of those who have to take decisions to decide which bucket it should actually be put into. So the longer the law, the more discretion there is, not less. So this is an important thing. Now, if therefore you cannot decide on what there will be, what is if the laws cannot be written for all future outcomes, then the only way to resolve it, it has to go to court. If it has to go to the courts have to function. So there is no way of getting the administrative system to deal with what the legal system can do. And by the way, the converse of this is also true. No amount of brilliant legal jugglery, judicial pronouncement can substitute for the executive's activities, of the administrative activities. Now, this is a very basic point. Everybody understands this, but remains a major flaw in the way we think of our administrative structure. So this is very, very important. Get our legal system going again. No amount of juggling. Now the time there's no more time for us to go around it in any way. The government has some role in this. The judiciary itself has a role in this, but this is something we need to take. The second important thing we need to look at, we need to ultimately get our administrative structure to work again. We need administrative reform. Now, there's a great amount of pride, very often this term is used, that the bureaucracy is the steel frame of India. And this term is erroneously very often attributed, even in, by the way, the administrative Labasna, where the IAS is trained, even there it's erroneously attributed to Sardar Patel. But in fact, this term is not from Sardar Patel. This term actually comes from the British Viceroy who was running India at the time of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. After the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, the fact that India, and then of course you had the non-cooperation movement, the fact that the British Raj held together at that time was attributed by the British rulers of that time to the steel frame of India. Please look this up. So it is the British conception of the steel frame of India to keep India caged. And that cage has now, 75 years of independence later, completely rusted. We need administrative reform desperately, and we need to put in a large amount of effort into this to be done. There is small efforts are being made, but one of those is to reorient the Indian government and what it does. I don't know if you're aware that the central government alone has 840 autonomous bodies. I'm not taking into account departments, I'm not taking into account ministries, all of that. It has 840 autonomous bodies. There needs to be a serious audit of what these bodies do. Jute alone will have half a dozen bodies. So we need to begin to seriously think about shutting them down, amalgamating, and doing all of the things. And for the very first time since independence, a serious effort is being made to actually shut down significant parts of the outdated parts of the government. Departments are being shut down or merged. And of course, every time this happens, somebody or the other who is an incumbent of that system is going to complain about this. So, and this has to happen in every facet of how this is done. So, give you some examples. In just the last few years, bodies like the All India Handloom Board, the All India Handicraft Board, very recently something called the Tariff Commission was shut down. Now, you'll ask, what did these bodies do? Now, let me tell you a little bit about the Tariff Commission, which has just been shut down like a few weeks ago. It is a body which had maybe 46, 70 odd people. And contrary to the name, it had very little to do with setting tariffs, as in duties and so on. It was actually a descendant of a body called the Bureau of Industrial Cost and Pricing, BICP. Some of you may be old enough to remember what this is. This is a pre-1991 body which used to set the internal tariffs of the country, which is the steel tariff at the price at which steel was sold internally. So BICP obviously became irrelevant after 1991. And it then reinvented itself as the Tariff Commission. But of course, it didn't. The tariffs are set by international negotiations, by the Commerce Ministry, negotiations with the Finance Ministry, and so on. So the Tariff Commission was not setting your duties. So the job of the Tariff Commission, which was the original job of the BICP, was to set internal tariffs, which of course we no longer set. So this body consequently has been irrelevant since 1991. It was finally shut down in 2022. It had 3 floors in a building right behind Khan Market, if you go there, with several dozen people who worked there. Many people joined this department and retired without actually having done anything. So point I'm making is there are so many such redundant bodies. There was something called the All India Handicrafts Board. When it was shut down, those who were leading lights of that body made some noise. Till the then Minister of Textiles asked for the minutes of the meetings of this board. It turned out that there were more minutes for 16 years. And there are numerous such bodies. A major effort is currently being made to restructure the railways based on a report that I had written. So if you Google up my name, the Indian Railways, SANJEEV SANYAL, you'll see there are at least 50 blogs about how evil I am. But the fact is, this now needs to be done. This is not making the case that the Indian government is bloated. Ironically, the Indian government is not bloated. It is one of the smallest governments relative to population in the world. The problem is that the government is wrongly oriented to doing things it should not be doing. Now that the government has withdrawn out of those activities have to be shut down. But for the last 8 years or so, if we had allowed this system to simply continue, what would have happened is that the way the governments work is they keep filling out the vacancies. So same thing was happening with Tariff Commission. People would retire, a vacancy would pop up. It doesn't matter that the person was doing nothing. And that vacancy would be advertised and it would be filled up. Meanwhile, there are many activities actually the government should be doing, which don't get opened up because they are new activities, but there are no vacancies there because no vacancies were created. So this reorientation of the government is what is going on. So there are large areas, by the way, we need more judges in this country. We need to have, for example, more policemen, but not the danda wielding policemen. We need people who can do forensics. people who can deal with digital fraud, those kinds of policemen. We don't have enough of them. We don't have enough forensic labs in this country, for example. So this reorientation will not happen naturally. Now, as you know, just now the Prime Minister has announced 1 lakh people will be hired in the next 1 year. So immediately somebody will raise the question, why didn't you do this all this while? Because you couldn't. Because if you hired without first squeezing the system and starving it on the things that it didn't do, and by the way, sitting on the top, you can't actually tell upfront which bits are needed and which bits are not. So you had to first squeeze the system a little, make it hungrier, and then you can reorient it into things that can be done. So this new oriented hiring that will happen will now happen into the things that we think are the things we need to grow. The same effort is happening even in the army. We need a younger army oriented to doing things like being able to use drones, for example. Cannot keep doing. So the same thesis has to be done. So one big area where we need reform is administrative reform. The third big area that we need effort is actually in infrastructure. Now, there are certain areas where we actually made progress in infrastructure. While one can still complain, but by and large, highways are no longer the constraint to moving stuff around this country. The airports are not a constraint on moving. In fact, if anything, our airports are better than those we deal with in the rest of the world. We are now rolling out 5G. Ports is an area where we can improve, but clearly, no doubt that our infrastructure backbone today is at a different level from where we used to be a few years ago. Now, that doesn't mean we don't need infrastructure. There is an area where we do need infrastructure, and that is in our upgrading of our urban infrastructure. So the connectivity infrastructure has been built to a large extent. We are now trying to interconnect all those bits that have been built. So there's a project, as you may know, called the Gati Shakti. Gati Shakti is not about the individual infrastructures, but about interconnecting them. So that is also getting done. That's not about the next 25 years. That's about here and now. But the next 25 years is about making our cities more livable. And a major effort, now new effort has been built, of which I'm a part of that. A high-level committee has been set up on urbanization. Just now, a few weeks ago, I'm a member of that committee. And we'll be really taking up the issue how to think about next generation cities. And even there, we need to think about them in the context of uncertainty and evolution into the future. One of the things we do not want to do is to have this whole rigid master planning approach to urban design and management. That clearly has not worked. Having ever more detailed master plans is not going to take us anywhere further. You've tried that over and over again since the building of Chandigarh. It has always failed, and it will keep failing forever because it completely misses the point about the fact that cities are living and evolving organisms, and the brilliance of your upfront plan is not going to get you anywhere. So a lot of it is about on-the-go management of transition. It is not about the brilliance of your original plan. And so a lot of the things that need to be done in that context, and I maybe in an earlier discussion, I had also given you the example of Singapore versus Chandigarh. I don't know if some of you remember that. I can give that example even here, why they are two completely opposite ways of managing cities. And the Chandigarh model is the problem. It's not the solution. Then a lot of new investment needs to be made into how we manage our urban spaces, whether it's the big cities, the small cities.
Why not elaborate that Chandigarh words?
Okay, I'll elaborate that. Okay. So since we are dealing with large schemes of time, let me tell you what this is about. If you went back to 1965 and you were looking around for urban models, then two models popped up at that time. Remember, Chandigarh was designed in the 1950s. It was designed literally as a mechanical system, a Newtonian system, because the person who designed it, Le Corbusier, called it a machine for living. So note that much of the theory behind it so that you understand this. And the idea is very much a waterfall idea. Those who are know what I'm doing is essentially, much of my talk is essentially the distinction between the waterfall and agile. And so the waterfall idea was, a great city is one which had the perfect plan and then perfect implementation. At about the same time that this city was coming on stream in 1965, a country became independent called Singapore. Singapore originally became independent, a part of Malaysia. The S in Malaysia is Singapore. Originally, what is now Malaysia was Malaya. But the Malay politicians of Malaysia came to the conclusion that Singapore was very, very poor. It had no prospects and full of Chinese who are going to be troublesome if in a democracy. So actually, Singapore was pushed out of the Malay. So here it was a country that became independent in spite of itself. And there is a very famous picture of its first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew weeping on Independence Day. This is the only country in the world where the Prime Minister was unhappy because it had so little prospects. And those of you who know Singapore of that time, it was full of slums. There were riots all the time between various communities. And it had no natural resource, still doesn't have any natural resources. And in fact, to this day, it has to import water from Malaysia. So it had no assets, no prospects. And that is precisely what was feared by the Malays, that this was, a slum-ridden place. In fact, we take photographs of Singapore from that time, you'll see pigs are running around, there are ditches. It's a pretty horrible place. It doesn't look, there were some nice parts, but much of it wouldn't have looked too different from Dharavi. So Lee Kuan Yew decided that the only asset he had was the fact that it had a bunch of British era port area that had what was naval port that was being evacuated by the British as they were leaving. So he decided to turn it into a container port, which was then a new idea of doing containers. Earlier, all shipping was bulk shipping. So containers, so he converted it into a container shipping and became very, very successful as a container shipping hub. It still is a major container shipping hub. And the other asset he had was very cheap labor. So Singapore went into light manufacturing, particularly of garments. Singapore is in fact the first country to industrialize based on cheap garments manufacturing. And in fact, it was the place you went for basically buying fakes. In fact, to this day, there is a brand there called Crocodile. It started life as a ripoff on Lacoste. So this was what Singapore started. Now it succeeded so well by 1980, it was no longer a place for doing cheap manufacturing. So it moved up the value chain and it got into electronics. So those of you who have been to Singapore in the 80s or had relatives who went there in the 80s will know they used to go to Mustafa and buy some cheap electronics. So in the 80s and 90s, that is what Singapore did. But by the 90s, it was already a developed country. There was no longer a place to do cheap manufacturing of anything, including electronics. So much of that had moved on first to Korea and then to Indonesia and although China ultimately. So Singapore moved up the value chain. It moved into education, entertainment, finance, and became a financial hub. Many of you may even send your kids to study in Singapore. Nobody in 1965 would have imagined sending a kid to study in Singapore. But that's what happened. And today, that's where it is. Now, notice one important thing. In 1965, did Lee Kuan Yew have a great plan about where this was going? No, he didn't. All he did was adapted along the way. He looked at what his assets was, made up what he thought was a doable thing. Many of the things Singapore tries do not succeed, by the way. Some things succeed, some things fail, some things go wrong for periods of time. For example, this idea of being an entertainment hub, obviously, if you suddenly get hit by COVID, turns out to be a liability, but they survived it. But I'm just pointing out to you that Singapore's success is not built on great master plan. Singapore's success is based on flexibility. Now, all through this entire period, we built cities in India with great master plans. Even Chandigarh essentially is a subsidy scheme for bureaucrats. It's not a city with any zing in it at all. It's basically a parasitical city. To the extent that the city shows any zing at all, it happens outside of the plan in places like Mohali, which is not in the plan. Even that Nekchand garden that you go and see is actually technically illegal. It's on forest land. So what Chandigarh is through this entire period is essentially remained locked. And now we are so proud of it, we have turned that plan into a UNESCO plan, and now we can't do anything with it. So it for all time to come will remain a subsidy scheme for bureaucrats. Now increasingly retired bureaucrats, not even serving bureaucrats. But it's actually a parasitical city because it lives off the revenues generated in other parts of the country. Ironically, since it's the capital of Haryana, much of that revenue comes from Gurgaon. Now, Gurgaon is a great example of a city which, in fact, ignored the plan. Much of Gurgaon is, in fact, was built illegally. And yet, Gurgaon generated value. It ignored the master plan completely. Now, this is not to suggest that Gurgaon can't be done better. There are many, many problems with Gurgaon. I happen to have owned some real estate there. My dad lives there. So I'm very conversant with the problems of Gurgaon. But let me say that despite all of this, Gurgaon has evolved and has generated jobs. If a young person grows up in Gurgaon and a young person grows up in Chandigarh and they reach the age of 25, is it likely that the Gurgaon fellow will go to Chandigarh or the Chandigarh fellow will go to Gurgaon? 99% of the times, the Gurgaon fellow, the Chandigarh person will be moving to Gurgaon, which tells you which is the more successful city. Now, the point I'm making is the solution is to do Gurgaon better. What Singapore is in fact a well-managed Gurgaon. It is not a grown-up Chandigarh. What we need to do is to manage the evolution as it happens into the future. And this is also true if you go back all the way into history. If you go to Varanasi, Varanasi has existed for thousands of years. But you never hear of Varanasi being a great urban plan. You always read your history books, Harappa was such a great planned city because it had straight roads. But kindly notice that the people of Harappa abandoned it. Didn't matter how straight those roads were. It was unable to adapt to climate change and the loss of water. Varanasi, on the other hand, has adapted over thousands of years. The fact that it has squiggly, wiggly roads makes no great difference because fact of the matter is it's made for walking. How does it matter if the roads are squiggly and wiggly? After all, you all go to London, it also is full of squiggly and wiggly roads. So what's the point you're making? Nothing. The problem is you're trying to drive roads, cars through them. The car is not meant for cars, meant for people. So adapting so Varanasi is an example of an evolving, adapting city, which I'm not saying we have to just preserve it in the way it is. You have to invest into it, and this government is in fact investing into it, including, as you may know, the cleaning up the ghats, cleaning up the. So we don't have a, if you're thinking of it as a living city, you have to keep evolving it. You have to be willing to change things, but not in a rigid way. You're doing it along the way. It's not because of a grand plan. There's no problem with the plan of Varanasi. The problem is in the minds of those who want to have straight roads running through those. But that doesn't mean we do not invest into it. For example, the Kashi Vishwanath project is a good example of a strategic investment into one part of the city to allow a certain activity in that area to revive in a particular way. So coming back to the point I'm making. I have now given you many examples and I can keep talking, but I think I should stop. Maybe they'll be more interesting to have a two-way conversation. But I hope I've allowed you to understand our thinking process when we are thinking about the long term. Our thinking process is not about being able to predict the future. Some short-term predicting may be needed in order for us to be able to respond to current situations or in things that we can see immediately turning up. But we are thinking 25 years. It is not about the prescribing a great future, but about creating systems that are robust to the unprecedented. A legal system needed so that it is robust to the unknown and uncertainty and the unprecedented. We need an administrative system that is evolving and is responsive to the evolution of systems. So which requires you continuously to reorient the administrative system, to shut down things which are not needed, to in fact hire new people into things the government should be doing. And I give you some examples. We need, similarly on urbanization, we need to be able to adapt to the new needs of whatever turns out to be. It's quite possible that in the future we won't be driving cars but driving drones. I can't predict this, but let's say if that happens, then I'm afraid all the roads we built in all our cities are largely a waste of time. What we need is, landing pads on top of all our buildings. That's all we need. Not trying to predict the future. I'm just pointing out to you a possibility. So I'm just pointing out to you, do think about, when you're thinking longer term, you have the ability to adapt wins over your ability to predict every time. And I don't have to explain this to all of you because all of you are in business. The brilliance of your business plans is irrelevant to your ability to deal with random shocks that came to whatever your business was, or the changes in technology, changes in market, changes in government policy. Now, in that context, ease of doing business is very important. But you can clearly see in the context what we have already done, so that you understand the context, so you'll clearly know what we are likely to do. Since my view is all about change, it must also be about creative destruction. Right? So this is the reason that the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code was brought in. We do not believe in the ability of the BIFR to bring back old industries. We certainly don't believe in the ability of bureaucrats to be nurse back businesses. What you need is an Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code to allow creative destruction to happen along the way. This is why we do not get fazed by even large entities like SR Steel or Jet Airways breaking down. Because from our perspective, that is what is to be expected. Creating systems that are able to deal with this is what you need. We have no interest in saving any particular industry. The success of capitalism is not based on saving any particular capitalist. System has to churn. And since I cannot predict which one of these is going to succeed, the system has to allow for some people will succeed, some will fail, and that system will happen. So you need a financial system, consequently, that can deal with it, not just an insolvency. That's why you need an equity market, well regulated, allowing for this process to happen. You need a banking system that can lend, creditor rights are clear. So if the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code does not, if the processes are not good enough or clear, I'm with you. We need to improve that. We need to get out of the mindset that if things go wrong, somehow it's a criminal activity. And that is why I take that business of those criminal things very, very seriously. Because I cannot, if you're taking a risk, there is a possibility it'll go wrong. The outcome cannot determine whether or not whatever you did is criminal or not, or even wrong. It just has to be based on certain upfront principles. You cannot have a retrospective tax. That suddenly you made a lot of money. Oh, you made a lot of money. Let me go retrospectively and tax you. Why? But upfront, you didn't know how to do that. So this is the importance of understanding. Now you can see that this pervades all our thinking, by the way. Same idea there behind GST. We needed to create a common market for this creative destruction process to happen. What is the arena in which this game will be played? That game has to be played. It's called the market. Unfortunately, we didn't have a united market, a common market. We're going around the world making presentations. India has 1.38 billion people. So what? When it was more difficult for Mumbai to deal with trade with Delhi than to deal with Shanghai, what's the purpose of this? So we needed an internal market. That required us to have a GST. Painful reform, but it's done. We needed to do it for exactly this purpose. So creating the frameworks for this game to proceed. Since India loves cricketing analogies, let me say, it's not the business of the government to decide, as government is BCCI, not the business of BCCI to figure out which game will proceed in which way, who will score how many runs. It's their business. to create the field and make sure it's a good field to play on, which is infrastructure. Its job to create the rules. Maybe the rules should be better, but the rules show that the game can be played and there ease of and there should be simple rules so that the players know what those rules are. 3, it needs to create umpires. That is the judiciary. But it's not the business of BCCI to say the game should end in one team winning, the other team losing, that this guy should bowl so many overs, should score so many runs. That was the idea of what the Planning Commission used to do. But just because the Planning Commission is now removed, that doesn't mean markets can either determine this. This is fully unknown. It is true, some teams may have a higher probability of winning than others, but it is for the viewers to judge that. It is not for BCCI to judge the outcome. The same principle is true for the government, not the business of the government to work out how this game will proceed and to where. It is the government to make sure that the playing field is there for you, the rules are there, the umpires are there. And when unprecedented circumstances appear or new formats are invented, we provide it. So if you invent T20 becomes a new way of playing, then yes, the business of the BCCI to make sure that there are floodlights so that it can be played. So if similarly, it's the government's business to make sure 5G is there in time for you to do your business. Not my business to figure out whether you're talking to him or talking to him. But unfortunately, despite 30 years of reforms, we used to have, it is still, the thinking is very much embedded in much of our, and this is how much of our policies are made, because of the way everything is set up, including the way the administration is trained to do. And I'll end with, maybe, are any of you in the BPO and software, those kinds of businesses here? BPO type or business outsourcing type businesses? No, not here. But anyway, some of you may know this, that till 2 years ago, the entire business outsourcing, everybody is very proud, India, software power, outsourcing, etc. Did you know that this entire sector had these strange telecom regulations which regulated them? And these regulations were really bizarre. You can go and look them up. I've written about them in the economic survey also. The rules were that if anybody was doing business using the telecom lines, then they had to have an EPA BX machine in their backyard. Otherwise, it was illegal. So any of you working from home, by the way, all of you were doing illegal activities. Now, while the telecom ministry didn't come to each one of you and enforce it, they did enforce it on the BPO and software businesses. So all of them had to keep an EPA BX machine with them. Now, this is totally bizarre in a world where everything functions on cloud. So you had to keep, and so therefore the BPO guys could not use the cloud. Not only that, there were these regulations that you had to separate the Indian business from your foreign business. So let's say if you have a Singapore Airlines back office operation in India, and you were somebody who bought a Singapore airline ticket and you wanted to go into the system and find out something about your ticket or from the call center, then when you started in from Kolkata and got the flight and there was a problem, you had to call a different call center than if you landed in Kolkata and you wanted a clarification, you had to call a different one. All of these rules were there. And when I began to raise issues about why these rules were there and why should the telecom department be regulating all of this, the argument was made because all of this is done based on telecom lines. So I pointed out that this was all based on electricity also, so the power ministry should also regulate it. And since all the people who are running all of these things were breathing oxygen, so the environment minister should also be involved. So anyway, these rules were removed. And one of the reasons you're seeing this recent boom in this industry, you may have seen there's actually a shortage of people in the outsourcing business as we speak, lakhs of people getting hired, is because these self-imposed rules were removed. And there are many such places. We had self-imposed rules on drones. They were so stringent that anybody who basically was flying around a drone in this country, you could be jailed for violating some aviation norms. So every drone, including the Shadiwala drone, was supposedly being dealt with as if it was a large jumbo jet flying around. Those rules have now been changed, but only a year ago. And you can see how the drone sector has exploded out. The PM has just recently done a drone Mahotsav. And I think we are already emerging as among the top 3-4 players in the drone space. A huge innovation is happening in that area. So I'm giving you a flavor of how we think about these issues. The idea is to open them up, to allow people like you to take risks. Some of you will succeed, some of you will fail. Those who will fail will hopefully dust it off, stand up again and take another risk. And that is what it comes down to. And so as I come to the end of my talk, let me say the reform agenda of the next 25 years is to unleash the innate entrepreneurial spirit, the risk-taking spirit, the innovative spirit of all Indians. And I don't only mean entrepreneurship in the business sense of the word. We want our sportsmen to take risks. We want our scientists to take risks. We want our artists to take risks. Because the real problem of India is our fear of taking risks. And this was a very debilitating thing for all these years, particularly before 1991, when we explicitly forbade it, but remaining at the back of our heads that somehow taking a risk is a bad thing. So kids were told, kya karna hai bhai, to haan, UPSC exam lo. But that, luckily, the whole thing is changing now. And the best way to know that times are good into the future is how things have changed. When I ask people, when I go to a good university like an IIT or ask them, what do people want to do? So I ask people, how many of you want to write the UPSC and how many of you want to start a startup? So earlier on, there would be 1 or 2 fellows, maybe came from some business family or was naturally inclined their way. 3-4 people would say, I want to do a startup. And a significant number of people would say they wanted to do a UPSC. That has now completely flipped. Only a tiny number of fellows in the class will say they want to do the UPSC. And usually, there'll be at least half of the class who want to do something entrepreneurial. Many of them want to do startups. And usually the cleverer fellows in the class are the ones who want to do this. So you can see that there is a shift in the dynamics of the system from a culture where we celebrated rent extraction and value extraction to a culture where we celebrate value generation. From somebody saying that I want to grow up in life and become deputy commissioner or something or the other, to somebody saying I want to be a CEO of something. That is the real change in India. And enabling that process is what the business of government is. The reform process is for the next 25 years. Now I'm going to end. I know I have exceeded my time of speaking, but what about social security in this context? If risks are to be taken, if you're going to create this culture, then obviously there will be some part of the society that will keep, including people who may be coming from well-to-do backgrounds, will also go bankrupt in this process. So we need to have consequently certain amount of social security, a safety net in place to allow that. But notice the concept of safety nets is a concept related to absolute poverty eradication and insurance. It is not about inequality. This is so if you look at the kinds of things that are being done, this is not about taxing the rich to help the poor. This is about providing direct benefits to the very poor and providing them safety nets. So when, for example, we had the COVID crisis, provide 800 million people with access to food. It's not like everybody, all the 800 queued up and wanted food, but they had access to it. But even when you do not have this, even before the COVID crisis, what were we investing in? We were investing into insurance, health insurance for the very poor. Creating large numbers of new AIMs across the country so that this is available. Opening up NEET so that more doctors can be created rather than hold it together into an elite activity in the name that, oh my God, what will happen to the quality? No, I'm sorry. You need to open these things up so that there can be more private and government colleges and more hospitals. By the way, this also needs to be done with other professions as well, including those of yours, the legal profession, chartered accountants profession. In the name of sort of holding together in turning these into elite products, we are not allowing enough expansion. The country needs multiple more accountants and chartered accountants and lawyers and so on. And so we need to open these up into systems where there are many more of this to happen. Some of them will go wrong. So, but the same concept is there for also the poor. Directly provide them with housing, directly provide them with water, directly making sure that electricity and gas, and then freeing them up so that they can participate in this risk-taking entrepreneurial India. So with that, let me stop, and I'm happy to answer Q&A questions.
I think nobody even blinked when you were talking. There was no blinking in. I mean, people were listening to you with such rapt attention. I mean, absolutely an outstanding talk, and that needs a special applause, please. Sir, I was told that Mr. Sanyal would be very much interested to take question and answer session from our members. May I request you to put your name in one of the slips and give it to Rosani. You can take the slip. Whoever wants to ask the question, who will give it to me. So I can call the names, and they will put their name in the slip and turn it over to you. So may I request, I'll start with my past presidents from my right side. So my right side, Mr. Sajan Bhajanka is here. So Sajanji, would you like to ask a question to him? Yeah.
Sir, thank you very much to taking us in a future journey. Sir, in my opinion, although indirectly you have covered and indicated to that, but in my opinion, in next 25 years, government's policies and as well as the natural flow will lead to the situation where all the Indians will be, all the Indian families particularly, will be having a house for himself. Maybe it is rented house or maybe it is your owned house. So this would be a big achievement in the country, and this will also lead to economic reforms. It will help all the industries, and other than the infrastructure, this would be a big this nucleus for the development. But it seems that the government presently, it is not giving much attention to this. Sometimes they touch by some subsidy, something for the lower income people or this thing, but they are not paving the way, because for the housing, land is required. Government has lot of land everywhere, not in the cities, but in the peripheries. So government should pave the way for some system where they can release this land for the development. So, sir, your opinion on this, you must have thought about it. You might have also suggested in past to the government. So, your ideas. Thank you, sir.
So you're absolutely right that housing is not just housing, real estate generally, because housing is only one part of real estate. Development is an important part of economic growth. And of course, the government has put in a lot of effort, as you know, into at least on the poorer sections, in something called the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, which you may know, it's a massive scheme. And literally lakhs of houses have been built on the basis of this. But even here, before I come to government land, which is a slightly different topic, I want to show you there's a philosophical difference, how the philosophical difference changes the way we design policy. I want to keep drilling this into your head so that you understand how we think about problems, and therefore you will understand how we end up solving them. You see, the original idea was that if the poor need housing, then wise town planners know where that housing should be. They should build a large house for the very poor, usually at the periphery of the city where the land is cheap, and they'll build something and they'll go there. The experience of doing this has essentially not been very good. Very often those houses were poor quality. People didn't want to go there. Anyway, the migrants who come into the city, who are basically mostly the poor, they come in not because they have a housing problem. They all have houses in the village. They come here because of the jobs, and the housing that was created very often by various, like in Delhi it was DDA or whatever. Here I'm sure there is some equivalent. They were all built where those jobs were not connected to the jobs. So what has instead been done through the Awas Yojana is a much more decentralized approach. You decide where you can get yourself land. We will subsidize you to do it. So what has happened, it is, instead of being a top-down approach where the great planners decided where you go, it is a bottom-up approach. Let the poor decide where they want to live, where they can find land or whatever. We will provide some sort of a subsidy or something or opportunity. And there are various schemes, I don't know again, by which essentially the poor will be allowed to access funds, etc., to upgrade themselves. So instead of thinking again of housing as a static thing, but as a dynamic ladder for social climbing. So that is very much the way it has been conceived. And it has been a huge success. And I don't know how it is working in Kolkata, but I can tell you in many mid-tier cities like Agartala, for example, the dynamics of that city has changed because of the way people have taken resources and upgraded their houses. It's quite an amazing scheme. Rural areas also, a lot of now, many parts of India, you will not find a Purana tuta puta type ghar. Most people have pakka ghar, which has been built in very recent times through this. I know for a fact in UP, Madhya Pradesh, and so on, it is the case. So, so this is one part of the thing. The same thing is true into the future. Our point is to make sure property rights are clear, infrastructure for building out is clear. It is not the case of the brilliance of the town planner to decide where people must live. I am personally against rigid zoning. There's no reason why you shouldn't be living right next to your office, or there should be some area called factory area. I mean, okay, dangerous activities which involve some dangerous gas or something, I don't want to be in the middle of the city. But other than that, I think depending on how the real estate market evolves, there should be offices, even factories in some cases, intertwined with residential, educational, and all kinds of things. That's how every successful city in the world functions. Singapore is full of manufacturing. Even today, iron manufacturing is there, right in the middle of the city. Go to go to London, you'll see there's housing right in the middle of their financial district, and that's right next to their theatre district, which is right next to the London School of Economics. It's all mixed and matched. So all these rigid ideas of zoning all came from the wise man theory of development, where some wise man knew where the future was going to be, and they were going to. Instead, what we need to do, make sure basic infrastructure is put in place. The real estate lots are properly mapped out and put down, and then they let it evolve. New York has evolved through that. There are buildings in New York which were sometimes offices, sometimes residential. Many of them are half residential, half commercial, half office. How does it matter? So this is one part of it. The second part of it is about government land. It is absolutely true. Since we have come up with this point about evolution, then absolutely we have to apply it to the government itself. The government is sitting upon large chunks of land across the country, which may have been acquired for purposes that are not fit anymore, or didn't happen, or happened and no longer meaningful. And so thought is being given to this, incidentally. For example, redevelopment of railways land for commercial purposes, upgrading of stations, that has started. So that is the same thought has to be given to other things. I'll give you one major example. Salt lands. Did you know that there is something called the Indian Salt Service, and that this service owns 66,000 acres of land along India's coast? And I'm not just saying somewhere in Rann of Kutch. This includes 6,000 acres on Mumbai Island, 2,000 acres in Chennai. And this land is lying derelict, very often being encroached upon. Well, why on earth do we need to produce salt in the middle of Mud Island on Mumbai Island? You don't. It needs to be upgraded and reused. But all of this requires a certain flexibility in our way we think about these things, the way the administration is allowed to deal with these things in a transparent manner. Unfortunately, what happens is that any redeployment of land immediately becomes controversial. There is a case, then all kinds of things happen. Now, as a society, we have to, this is not just the government, as a society, we have to understand that this has to evolve. This includes the government, but it includes the political class, it includes the civil society, it has to include the judiciary. It cannot come and say, sorry, in 1922, this land was acquired, this salt land was acquired to make salt. Therefore, now we have to, for perpetuity, produce salt on it. No. Land use change has to be allowed. Same thing has to be true of, say, cities. By the way, Mumbai, Delhi, this city, Kolkata, has large amounts of derelict industrial land along the Ganga. Why do they need to be used to make jute? It should be redeployed to whatever else should be a more sensible thing to do with it today. And then when whatever that activity runs its course, that should also be demolished and carried on. What matters is that property rights are clear. If the lease is for 50 years, those leases for 50 years. Then if it's over 25 years, then what happens on that land should evolve. And there's a large amount of government land also. By the way, all of this should be redeployed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to now invite our past president, Mr. H.M. Bangar.
Sir, it was one of the most exciting and forward-looking lecture or the talk we have ever heard. So thank you for that. That has already been said. Now, what you were saying about the first thing, the legal problem that is binding us. The legal problems are almost self-created. The point is, the government is the biggest litigant. The rules are formed by various departments. Labor department has its own power, environmental department, excise department. Every department has the power to form rules. And often, if we want to follow one rule, other rule will be definitely violated. So every department pounces on you to see that my part of the law is not followed. Will it be proper that all the powers from them are taken and all the laws are decided by the law ministry? That will help that we can follow all the things. For example, sir, we are manufacturing cement. So sometime back, a typical case was there. Weights and measurement department says that not a single gram of cement can be packed less. It should be equal or more. So intentionally companies in a 50 kg bags were packing 20 to 50 grams extra. The average weight will be that much more. Suddenly the excise department came that you are removing so much cement without paying excise duty and you have to have a heavy penalty. The case dragged on for 5 years. Ultimately, the court decided. But why such cases, sir? Thank you.
So you're absolutely right that these kinds of things do happen. And one of the points being made here that I'm trying to say is that we need to, by the way, ultimately every government and every bureaucracy is a reflection of the society they're drawn on. Right? It's somebody like you, only you went into one direction, some person like you went and wrote the UPSC and became. So we're not different. So why do we have this problem? This problem arises because our mental image of the world is that better rules are detailed rules. We try to be explicit ki yahi hona chahiye, and then spend all our effort in trying to make sure that is applied in a certain way. Now, of course, it is not unlinked to a culture which is a rent extraction culture. All of this derives ultimately from a society that is effectively a rent extraction based society. We can blame the colonial period or Mughal period, whatever else you want to, but the fact is now we're 75 years into being independent. We need to begin to introspect as a society that celebrates rent extraction. We are literally the only society where the person who comes in the top few in the civil service exam comes on the front page of the. Can you imagine this happening anywhere else in the world? US mein who comes tops their civil service exam, nobody will be aware of including their relatives. Here they are on the front page. Why? Because the mental image is that of a rent extraction, control, top-down system. And that is what I'm trying to break down. The ultimate basis of this is the philosophical framework on which our society is based. It is not based on striving for excellence. It is based on, and so entire effort goes up in trying to, therefore those rules are set up. Now, if I tell you that the rule has to be changed, it will not be removed in the sense of change the rules and order. What they will say is a second rule will be put that we are going to fine you for having 20 grams more. That will be the new rule. Removal of the rule does not even occur to anyone. But part of the problem is that as a society, we are not asking for this. So now, since this is a business community, let me tell you how it looks like, how this manifests itself in the kinds of things, debates and discussions I have with business. And you will appreciate how this even pervades you. So I am at the receiving end of large numbers of presentations on how something can be improved. Okay. Every industry comes and meets me. So let me show you what a typical presentation from some industry body looks like to me. Hopefully Bharat Chamber will never do this again after this point I'm making. First slide aega. We'll start with India has 1 point. Let's say the presentation is by the shoelace making industry. I'm just taking a random example because I don't think there is a shoelace making association. My apologies if there is one. Let's say there is a shoelace industry association comes and meets you. The first slide will be India has 1.38 billion people. So everybody has 2 feet. Second slide. So many people need so many shoes. Then they will do some calculation and they will have niche likha hoga from ENY, McKinsey, whatever is the source of this. How many shoes? Then there'll be a graph of how many shoes will grow into infinity. And then after a few iterations, they will prove that every year India needs so many million shoelaces, hundreds of millions of shoelaces. And this is the export potential of shoelace industry. And then there'll be a slide on how AI will improve shoelaces. Then after doing all of these many iterations, they will basically come and prove to me that so many million people depend on the shoelace industry and it's the single most important industry in the country. Now, every slide does this, and because I see so many of them, I can now recognize which consultant has made it. Okay. So I recognize the color schemes of McKinsey, color scheme of Booz Allen, color scheme of ENY. I know who has prepared it, and the first 3 slides are the same for all of them. Then, the end of doing all this Ram Katha, they all want 0.25% subvention scheme. Now, after doing all of this, why this? Because the entire thinking process, even of industry, is not to remove. By the way, it's very rare that industry comes to me asking me for removing of all these criminal requirements, and then I have to date never had one. A think tank called ORF came and told me about it, but no industry body has ever come and told me remove all these criminal codes in our company law or whatever. They all come to me, however, for that 0.25 subventions. Why? Because this thinking process, even in industry, has gone कि पैसा value generation से नहीं बनता है, rent extraction से बनता है. All the software and tech industry did not come and tell me to remove all these telecom regulations from however, I have had many presentations and I have from industry bodies about how we need to create a 50,000 crore pool of money to invest into AI or some such industry. Why? Who is going to run that 50,000 crore pool of money? So, sir, some good joint secretary will do it. So I keep asking them, to agar wo joint secretary can deal with billions of dollars, why is he a joint secretary and not Elon Musk? But why does industry come and do this? Because even imbibed into your nervous system has gotten this idea that money is made through rent extraction, not value generation.
Thank you, Past President Shri G.D. Shah.
Sir, first of all, as a Calcuttan, we are very proud to see you in that position.
Thank you.
The 25 years reform which you have presented is very exciting. You have broken it into 4 parts: infrastructure, the administrative setup, judicial, and in the last, the social security. If this happens, we can definitely on the top of the world. I would like to my mind, the biggest reform Modi government has done is the GST. And I must congratulate the late Finance Minister, Mr. Jaitley, who did it with the full consensus of all the states. Why I'm telling that there has been pains, but I am a witness to this very thing which happened in the European Union in 1980s. When they wanted to do this European Union and all the customs barriers removed, they came out that so much of our petrol is wasted, so much of the truck time is wasted, and so on. And it was $1 billion question. So our pains has been less, and every day we are removing those pains. I must compliment the government for that. Now, sir, coming to your points, my feeling as exporter, we are doing very little on the shipping. We have only Shipping Corporation of India, which is age-old machinery, and we have not done anything. And this COVID has taught us how they have fleeced us to take the material from Indian ports to American ports and any other. I think government need to give it.
So what should the government do?
No, sir, they should come with some big corporations like that. If you can give the port.
No. You want us to create another shipping corporation in India? You've got to be kidding me.
Not at all. I don't want to.
Then
to create an atmosphere for
So-
the private sector to come into that.
good. So now you tell me what those rules are.
Beg your pardon?
Tell me what those rules are. We'll remove them.
No, that has to be.
Who's going to do it? You have to tell me. No, tell me the rules.
Yes, no. It will definitely.
No. This is where I'm a tough customer. If you tell me that you have to do something, where are the things that have to be done? You have to give me a list of those things. I'm promising you, I will take them very, very seriously. But do not tell me it has to be done. Who is going to do it? You have to do it.
No, we will do it, and we will come to you on behalf of the Engineering Export Promotion Council
Yes.
of India with all the rules.
Yes, you tell us the rules that are stopping Indian entrepreneurs to go into shipping. And we take this, by the way, this is a matter we take very quite seriously. Many debates have happened on this. And there's a lot of debate on cabotage and all of this as well. And, there are two sides to all of this. So tell us what are the rules that need to be changed, not subsidies, rules that need to be changed.
I'm not talking subsidy at all,
Yeah.
sir.
So that the market can naturally take off in this. And if there are rules that can be changed, that need to be changed, we will certainly look at them. If it can be done, it will be done.
Another ports, sir. Ports, some progress has been made. But I think it need to be more.
There we know the problems. So we are trying to solve them. The shipping thing, if entrepreneurs who seriously want to get into it can bring us that here are the 10 rules why our shipping industry is not growing. Tell us what they are. We will definitely look at it.
I'm putting a very different question to you.
Yeah.
Sir. What are the government's thinking on the cryptocurrency?
Government is going to come up with a policy paper, so I can't comment on it because it's about to release it. All I will say is that I'm personally a fan of investing in tulips.
Okay, sir, we will wait for that paper and then come back to you. Sir, I'm just repeating one thing which our president has told you. But why have you kept this LLP and partnerships out of your?
See, I'll tell you, it's a very simple thing. Let it be very clear. We want to have a very simple tax system for everybody. We started with the corporate sector because we needed to start somewhere. We had already done enough changes with the GST. So we didn't want to do everything in one shot. Also do remember that when you do these changes, we know that you hope that at some point you will begin to get the revenues from it, but you have no idea ex ante when you will begin to get the benefits from it. So when we did the GST in 2017 and then the 2019 reforms we didn't know whether those reforms will lead to revenue flows in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and so on. It turns out that despite COVID, those reforms have succeeded spectacularly and we're getting the revenues. So now it gives us the strength to begin to do other things. Obviously, when you get into LLPs and partnerships, this is closely linked to having to think through also personal income tax. So they cannot be really reformed separately. So obviously we are thinking of that too. We need to have very simple personal income tax system as well. So they will be done together whenever they are done. But as with everything, and a point that the Prime Minister has made, the Finance Minister has made, if everybody pays their taxes, then the tax system can be simple and it can be a low rate of taxes. And so the fact that the first round of reforms have given so many taxes back gives us the space to be able to do something else. Immediately, we have certain issues relating to the fact that energy prices have spiked up. Okay, hopefully, I'm assuming that's not a permanent state of being. Whenever the opportunity will arise and we do have the fiscal space, those other things will also be done. I mean, the underlying philosophy of this government has been made is to make ease of doing business, ease of doing living, and to have the simplest possible and most reasonable levels of taxation that we can have, which generate the taxes needed to run the government in a reasonable way. So that remains the agenda. And whenever we have the opportunity and fiscal space of doing it, we will do it.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, my job is to bring to you a paper on shipping.
Yes.
Either from the platform Bharat Chamber, if they agree, or from the Export Motion.
Yes, and the way to do that is you will not have 3 initial slides about how many people live in India, how many ships we need, how many exports will happen. It must directly go to why do we not have a large indigenously owned shipping industry? Tell me rule A1, B1, C1, what the rules are. Tell me also what those rules should be. We may not agree, but it's good to have a starting point.
Then, sir, you will have to give me joint secretary shipping aid to help with the frame.
No, you will do it. The joint secretary shipping will then.
Yes, made his point. We will.
Yeah, no, you will make it.
Santoshji,
We want you to be a participant. We are not a colonial government. You are a part of the government. This is a democracy.
You have to be short and brief, sir.
Yes, I'll not take much of your time, sir. Sir, the reason why we have so much litigation, let's go into the depth of that. I feel the reason why we have litigation is because the laws that are framed are so complicated. There is always a gray area. And because of existence of that gray area, do we have so many litigations? First of all, sir, I think you need to emphasize when you're taking a reform on laws, then I think that gray area should be removed.
So I will disagree with you. So let me tell you, my entire lecture was actually to dissuade you of this idea. So let me tell you what the problem is. The problem is the following. You see, the legal system does not generate answers in time. So in order to avoid something to go to the legal system, the laws are created in extreme detail. Right? Now, those extreme detail, ironically, does not solve the problem of going to the legal system. In fact, creates more problems because now you can interpret which section you want to go under. So you have gone into this spiral. This spiral cannot be solved unless you solve the legal system problem, because the point I'm making is the future is unknowable. So the situations in which the laws will be applied are unknowable. So no, it is not possible to write a law that will resolve all future situations unless you have infinitely complicated laws. So the solution, in my view, is to have very simple laws that do not solve all problems. In other words, there's lots of areas of gray. If a law solves, you should have a rule which is a 90-10 rule of thumb. If 90% of cases are taken care of by the law, good enough. Let the 10 cases go to court, and the court has to resolve them. What happens now is, in order to resolve that 10 cases from not going to the court, 90% of the law is for that 10% of the cases. So as a result of which, we end up with 50% of the cases ending up in the courts.
So there is a little, there's a small suggestion.
Hmm.
You see, you're framing a law. Let's talk about the real estate industry, whom I represent.
Yes.
When you're framing a law, don't you think it's wise that the stakeholders are involved in the framing of the law so that all these gray areas can be removed?
This is precisely the point I'm making. The stakeholders are no wiser than the bureaucrats. The future is unknown. So the solution is to have a simple set. I'm not saying stakeholders shouldn't be involved, but the problem you are saying about gray areas will not be solved by this.
No, sir, to a large extent, sir.
It will not be. That's the
Sir,
point I'm making.
I'll give you a small.
No, you cannot. This is a different conversation I want. This is the philosophical point
So
I'm
let's meet in Delhi.
making. Meet in Delhi will not solve this problem.
No, it will, sir. I
will
will
not.
give you examples. I will give you examples.
You have then not understood the point I'm making. If you have the stakeholders in the room, hopefully the simple law will be a better simple law.
I want a
Wait,
simple law, sir.
Yes, but it will not be a law that will take care of the gray area. This is the point. Do not try to solve the gray area problem with the stakeholder. The stakeholder consultations is important in order to make sure that the simple law that I come up with is a good simple law as opposed to a rubbish simple law.
I agree there. I fully agree.
That is why you need.
But let us remain in the profession.
The second point.
No.
I get your point. Second point.
But it will not solve the uncertainty problem. The stakeholders also do not know the future. So what will happen? Some part of the cases will end up in court. The court, in a world of case law, a common law system, that is why the system has been set up for the courts to resolve the system, the uncertainties as things evolve. Perfectly good system, but the system has to work. The opposite thing is what we are doing now. In order to avoid things ending up in the courts where they will not get resolved, you are asking the joint secretary to work out whatever is going to happen. Now for the not even 10%, maybe 3% of exceptions, 90% of the law is created. And the 90% of that law that is created for that 3% of exceptions causes so many complications that 50% of the cases go wrong. Have you understood?
Yes, sir, I haven't understood, sir.
Okay,
Another
sir.
point, sir. This is just a little bit of suggestion, sir. You have created this infrastructure committee, which I think is a great thing.
Yes.
Now we are talking about the term that you've used is creative destruction.
Yes.
Now in the real estate sector, there's a lot of space for creative destruction.
Absolutely.
Now, in the real estate committee or in the infrastructure urban committee that you have set up, you have not included the stakeholders. So
Yes,
don't
they
you
are.
think, sir, that you should?
So a lot of stakeholders are involved, not just there are architects, there are scholars, there are
No, I
people
mean
who have.
stakeholders from the side of the industries.
So I'll tell you why we cannot. Remember who we are. We are the regulator. So you have to understand the regulator cannot include inside itself. So the BCCI cannot have active players inside BCCI. So the same reason as the regulating body, we cannot have, we will consult with you, but you cannot be inside the system. So so there are people who have been involved. We are happy to, and we will talk with, in fact, one of the conversations we want to have is with the developers to involve them as a part of the evolution of cities. Absolutely. In fact, that
This
is one of,
this is what I was
yes, but
suggesting, sir.
you yourself cannot be inside the committee. That's the point I'm
So
making.
let the consultation happen.
Absolutely, yes. In
So-
fact, that is one of the purposes of this.
So let the consultation happen because that is not happening at the.
No, so that is one of the things we want to say
Hmm.
is that we have this idea that planning is all about wise men sitting in some committee telling how the city should evolve. Whereas look at all the great cities of the world, they involved city fathers. Who were these city fathers? They were like for example, New York. You know, the Rothschilds and the Gettys and all these people also got involved in how that city should evolve at that time. And many of them invested, many of the institutions of New York are built with those people. So we do need to involve the prominent citizens of that time. And that used to be the case in Indian cities till the 1950s. Mumbai, for example, had Rajabhai towers, and all of this were, you know, Jiji Bhai, all the great industrialists and thinkers. And similarly, politicians. Netaji himself used to be a municipal commissioner of Kolkata. So, you know, we have looked at our urbanization as something that some, you know, corporator and relatively junior official, which is a municipal commissioner, should be doing. Whereas in fact, this was a participative process which people used to do. It is now a forgotten thing. All the great cities of the world do this even today. You go to New York, Bloomberg is involved in the conversation. So this is absolutely needed to do. This is something that the committee has already wants to, I at least in the committee, I can't speak for the committee itself. I and the committee do want to involve the citizens in the conversation. Unfortunately, in fact, one of the things we are trying to do is to break this whole idea that the town and country planning department knows how the city should evolve. They don't. Their job is to lay out basic sanitation infrastructure. That's it. How the city itself will evolve is for the people of that time to develop.
Okay. Sir, we have to be very brief and no arguments and counter arguments. Surana ji, Ramesh ji, you have any questions? Because we are okay. So Surana ji. जी आप कोर्ट में बहुत जोर से बोलते हैं, अभी बोलिए ना.
Everybody has appreciated, so I will not take much of time, much appreciating. I only few points. You have taken very good agendas that there will be a plan to reform the justice delivery system and administrative reforms. Now, there is gap between the intentions of the government and when it reaches to the administration. They will never implement the intentions. And the litigations are increasing like anything. I will not say how to control those, but there should be some accountability for them also by making a committee or something should be there.
Committees are never accountable. That's the whole point.
See, if some private individual or Supreme Court judge is brought in, then sir, next thing.
No. Ultimately, the only form of accountability you have is democracy. So, ironically, you have to work through the political system.
So, right, sir. But what I say is that justice delivery system ends when the litigation continues for 10 years, 12 years.
Yes, so you have to, as a democracy, begin to demand the judicial system to deliver the goods.
So at least some time frame can be given that particular decision has to be taken by such court within a year or within 2 years. In income tax, I tell you, under section 250, commissioner has to give the judgment decision within 1 year. But then your CBDT has given a circular that it is only directory. And I tell you, 13-14 litigation is still pending 10 years. And they are fixing the case. We are loading it on the portal. And again, a notice comes, give the reply. And I can show you in one portal, 10 times replies there, they are not disposing of. So at least that revamp should be done that they
No, I totally agree with you. And this is something that I know the finance minister personally gets annoyed about. And she wants, and some improvement in this has happened, I know. maybe not to the entire extent, but absolutely agree with you that there is no excuse for repeated.
Because this delay is only because of the administrators,
Absolutely.
not because of us.
Not
And no
making-
business will like.
Not
this.
making any excuses. This has to be solved.
Then, sir, as rightly said by Mr. Bangad, so many rules and laws. GST audit separate, income tax audit separate, company audit separate. Why not one audit? So that all information you want comes there.
I agree.
So those things should be done, sir.
No, so sharing of information in the government is a major issue, by the way. And a lot of effort is being made, but one by one we are solving. For example, we put in a big effort to make it easy for you to register a company. I hope some of you are trying to register a company, seen it's improved. Now I'm working on a major project, which I mentioned in the economic survey over the last 2 years. How to deregister a company, not an easy thing to do. And hopefully that is being, you'll see that process is getting smoothened out. So you have to ultimately go one by one and clean the process up. Now, a major project I'm working on, you talked about income tax, but let me talk about, since this is about the future, about patenting. And India takes 58 months to do a patent. By the time the patent comes, the technology is already moved on. The China and US, meanwhile, do it in 20 months. Right now, this is after dramatic improvements in the system in India. It used to be much worse. So in the last 6 years, the number of patents being done in India has gone up from, I think, 9,000 to 29,000. Okay. But if we are celebrating this, do remember that China does 500,000 a year. Yes, 500,000 patents a year. And they used to do till decade ago less than us. Now, of course, there are issues about quality, this thing. But the point is, this is an example where when I made the point earlier, there are parts of the government that need to grow. We actually need more of these courts and NCLT courts and all these other things. So I'll give you the example of patenting as an area where the government needs to expand dramatically. The reason that it takes so long to do patents, among other things, of course, our processes are slow, etc., is simply that we don't have enough patent officers. We have only 850 patent officers. Now, this is a doubling in 5 years, by the way. But to put it in context, our 850 is competing with 13,000 in China. So if we're having a cricket match, this is the equivalent of them having 13 players on the field and we having not even one player on the field. You cannot compete. So consequently, we have to dramatically expand out our patenting capacity. And this is also true of trademarks, copyrights, everything. So when you hear that 1 million people will now be hired in the next 18 months, this is where the expansion has to happen. So there are parts of the government where you can simplify process. There are parts of the government where we need to actually hire people and deploy people. One of these is this, of course, there are problems with the process also, but we simply need more people doing the appeals. We simply need more people doing the company registrations. All of these need to be dramatically expanded, and they don't have to do in Delhi. In fact, much of this work can actually be done from home. It's just software. You're uploading things and downloading them. A lot of this can be done by AI. They don't even need people. So the point I'm making to you is that there are areas where capacities need to be expanded. So again, going back to my point of the last 25 years, removal of a lot of bureaucratic hassles to a large extent is removing rules, removing all the things. So the withdrawal of state part, I agree with, and I'm not debating that. But there are areas that the state is needed. And in those areas, we do need to expand capacity. By the way, I'm one of the believers that we need to dramatically expand even our foreign service. India has one of the smallest foreign services of any country in the world. Certainly of our size, there is no country that has such a small foreign service. So there are parts of our administration that need to expand. One of those is in all these appealing systems, which still need to be done.
I tell you one thing still. Delhi CBDT issues a notification. Can they not make a stable rule, at least for a year? Delhi gets on CBDT notification, changing this rule, changing this rule, changing this rule. They can make in the beginning of the year, they can make the rule, remember whatever rule they want to do it. Let it continue for a year. But it's daily see the notification.
Okay, fair
All
enough.
these
I mean,
things has to be looked
these
into,
are
sir.
things, processes that can be definitely changed and, you know, and done. And at the very least, those rules should be put in one place and internal mistakes, but I mean, internal, sorry, what is it? Contradiction should at least be removed. I agree with you.
So
Yeah.
I already said that 8 rules are changed every day. So therefore, that point I took. Mr. Beriwal, please.
We'll have to stop.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
already
look,
now.
sir, so
Yeah, this will have to be the last
Beriwal
question.
will
Yeah.
be the last question. One more question from the lady, because no ladies has.
Okay. ठीक है, चलो.
सर,
Two questions.
आपको सुनना हमेशा बहुत अच्छा लगता है और मैं प्राय सुनता रहता हूँ, कहीं ना कहीं मौका मिलता है. और मैं हिंदी में इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ कि यूनाइटेड नेशंस ने अभी हिंदी को अप्रूव किया.
ठीक है,
हमारी
कीजिए,
official
हम हिंदी
language की
में
तरह.
आपका उत्तर भी देंगे.
इसमें जो प्रॉब्लम की आपने बात की, एक पोल्यूशन इटसेल्फ में बहुत बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है. इंडस्ट्री के लिए वो जाते ही स्टेट में बोलते 33% लैंड को फॉरेस्ट बना दो. आपकी ऑलरेडी एग्जिस्टिंग इंडस्ट्री है, उसमें आपने कोई छोटी सी मशीन भी जोड़ी तो संग संग पब्लिक हियरिंग करो, पूरा प्रोसेस करो, फिर वो लास्ट में लिख देंगे 33% प्लांटेशन करो. अब एक एरिया में 30, उसका लॉजिक क्या है उसका कोई मालूम नहीं. आरटीआई लगाई, बोलते इसका लॉजिक हमारे पास कुछ नहीं है. हमने स्ट्रेट वे कह दिया 33% करो, बस इसके ऊपर कुछ नहीं बने था. एनजीटी जाओ, और ये जो पब्लिक हियरिंग होने से आरटीआई एक्टिविस्ट पूरी फैक्ट्री के चारों तरफ एक्टिव हो जाते हैं.
तो आप ये रूल ले आइए, हमारे पास दिखाइए क्या बात है. आई डोंट नो द रूल, सो आई यू ब्रिंग इट टू मी. I agree the industrial areas is impractical to have 33%, and in fact one of the funny things in this country is that every time we set up a university, factory, everything needs some hundreds of acres. Why?
इसीलिए हमने सोलर भी लगाया, उन्होंने टाटा ने लिख के दिया.
No, so let bring this to my, because I think one of the things I want to do is we have unnecessary land usages in India. We be taking industry and building, using too much land for our industrial education and IIT बनाना है तो 500 एकड़ क्यों चाहिए भाई 500 स्टूडेंट्स के लिए? हर एक एकड़ के हम लोग क्या खेती करने वाले हैं? So same logic is used for industry. Why do you need 40 acres to set up a small factory in most places when the factory itself can work on 3 acres?
सर खुद के रहने के लिए घर बना रहे हैं, वहाँ 9 पेड़ थे, वो बोलते हैं अब 9 पेड़ हटाओगे तो 45 लगाने हैं. तो 45 लगाने के बाद घर कहाँ बनाना है ये बता दो.
No, so yeah, this I agree, and these building codes need to be changed, because in fact the purpose of good design is to densify. I want you to occupy as little space as possible so that there can be a forest where the forest should be.
Right.
Because you're using up so much land, I'm having to encroach into areas that actually are forests.
सिटी में सेंट्रल प्लेस बना दो, वहाँ कंट्रीब्यूट कर देंगे लैंड के लिए, आप फॉरेस्ट बनाओ, नो प्रॉब्लम. सेकंड, गैस यहाँ सीबीएम गैस बिकती है, आसनसोल में पैदा होती है, दुर्गापुर में कंज्यूम होती है, पानागढ़ में कंज्यूम होती है, उसका प्राइसिंग सेटल होता है इंटरनेशनल प्राइस के ऊपर में. तो ये लॉजिक समझ में आता नहीं, इसमें इंटरनेशनल कहाँ से घुस गया, सारी इंडस्ट्री को अनकम्पिटिटिव बना देता है. मैंने गवर्नमेंट
This I don't know, this sounds way too specific, so I don't know what this is about. So
ओके, आप जो 25 इयर्स एजेंडा में हमारी रियल हिस्ट्री रीराइट करने का कोई प्रोग्राम है जो हमको रियल हिस्ट्री मिले?
हाँ, that's a debate discussion for another day. I am obviously a great advocate of rewriting our history, as you know, but today's discussion is not about that.
Third is there any program for demographic control? I am not saying population control, demographic control. Personally, I think
it's as I said, not an agenda for today. So let's stick to today's agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Sandeep Ghosh, please.
I thought there was a lady who was wanting to say something, unless he is a lady.
Yeah. No, last will be the lady.
Okay, there he is. Yes. Hello, how are you? I met you yesterday.
We met yesterday.
Yes.
I have a very simple question, direct, straightforward question. Why Arbitration and Reconciliation Act is not put into enforced so that it becomes very prevalent and we take care of all
so there
the
is I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is in fact a draft that is floating around also for mediation. So these are being taken up. There are opinions on how to go about this, or whether mediation can be put into the Arbitration Act through a reform and so on.
President of Indian Council of Arbitration, so I'm taking up the.
So please come to me. I have some serious issues with the current draft, so you can debate it. I'm quite certain I disagree with what you are going to say, but that's a different debate.
Yeah. I must congratulate you on your extraordinary speech. So like you were speaking that we are actually seeing a paradigm shift And what we need to do is actually, concentrate on human skills and, resilience, building compassion, critical thinking, lateral thinking, so that we are not overtaken by AI. And, we are actually thinking inside the box. So what my question is that why aren't we more actively looking at educational reforms? Like, the key word that struck out was thinking. So, like we should, like these are times where we are at the cusp of such major changes and technological revolution that, and you spoke about disruption and, destruction. So, in this day and age, if we look at, serious educational reforms, whereby,
Tell us specifically what.
yeah, like introducing, philosophical and say scriptural, say teaching into our educational, especially at the primary levels, so that the new generation is equipped with the more specifically, there's a word called anvikshiki, which has been coined by Chanakya, which is actually the science of strategic thinking. So that is what the new generation needs to learn.
The point of the matter is this.
That educational reform.
Educational reform has got to do with freeing it up to allow people like you to do it.
Absolutely.
As with everything else, the problem is in a rapid change, just like neither policymakers nor businesses can predict how the future will turn out to be. This is also true, by the way, of academics.
Absolutely.
Academics have no capability of knowing what the jobs of the future will be. So curriculums will always be behind the curve by definition. So one of the things that we are trying to do is taking Indian learning out of purely being in the hands of the academia and trying to make it much more open-ended. That's partly in the new education policy, but also by emphasizing the skilling part of things. Many of the skills that will emerge will happen too fast for education system to be able to deal with. But you in business may actually know more about it.
No.
So apprenticeships schemes, all those kinds of things need to be allowed. Also, we have to allow for education to happen outside of rigid systems. Kids are learning all kinds of things from YouTube and all kinds of other ways. So you have to enable hybrid learning of all kinds, certification systems of all kinds to be able to flourish. Having this idea that a great team of wise teachers are going to be able to teach the next generation is itself probably flawed idea, because it's what you need, therefore, is to allow a much more free market approach to it, which, by the way, thanks to YouTube and social media, anyway, these kids are being bombarded with new ideas. So what we need is, just like I talked about creative destruction in the space of economics, we need that in the world of ideas as well.
Totally. Like you said, AI is the new tool, but only after
I don't know if it's the new tool. I can't predict it.
But only after we shape it, will it shape us like
I
any other tool. So
I have as a policymaker, I have to be agnostic to this.
Completely.
So what I would prefer is that we create the conditions, the rule makings, so that somebody like you or Baiju or whoever it is, or it could be Infosys, which is training thousands of people, takes up various models and tries them. Some will work, some will fail. So the marketplace for ideas is also true. But what I do not want is policymakers being involved in guiding the direction on this. That is a recipe for disaster.
No, definitely.
Because no joint secretary in the education ministry knows where the future jobs are or where AI is going.
True, absolutely. Like they say, like along with coders, if you could just have sociologists and philosophers, writing the
sociologists also have no idea about this.
Just writing the algorithms.
In case you have never spent time with them.
No, definitely.
And certainly the economists don't. I can tell you this for fact.
No, that for sure.
So don't think that these the point I'm trying to dissuade you from is this idea that, okay, this bunch of people don't know, therefore we shall get wise people from another field. I'm sorry, the social scientists have no idea. So kindly do not try to solve this problem by having this wise man solution to the problem. It must be a creative destruction solution to the problem, creating marketplaces for ideas. Some ideas will work, some will fail. Incidentally, the entire basis of our civilization and Hinduism is this. It's a marketplace for all kinds of ideas. So consequently, you tell me what are the rules you need changed for allowing this marketplace to work. But do not tell me that we need this outcome, because you told me about a certain outcome. And I have real problems with prescribing this outcome, particularly when you told me it involved some social scientists.
That was for the algorithms. No, absolutely. Thank you so much.
We have come towards the end of today's enlightening exclusive session. And before I request Shri Naresh Pachisia, Senior Vice President of the Chamber, to propose the vote of thanks, I would request our President to kindly present a few mementos to Shri Sanjeev Sanyal.
Oh, thank you so much.
I would now request Shri Pachisia to propose the vote of thanks and end today's session.
Mr. Sanyal, members of the chamber, guests and friends. At the end of this exclusive, and I'm sure you'll agree, quite insightful session on reforms agenda for the next 25 years, it is my most pleasant duty to propose a very hearty vote of thanks to Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Member, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. Thank you, sir, for kindly sparing some of your valuable time in addressing the members of the chamber this morning. As the Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, rightly pointed out, that the next 25 years is indeed very crucial for India. And in this context, the manner in which you articulated the three pillars of the theory that you have in mind for the next 25 years, be it legal reforms, administrative reforms, and infrastructure, especially urbanization, that was quite insightful and gives a very good big picture to the business fraternity out here. And thank you very much for this. Those who do not know, just for them, Mr. Sanyal is a very not only carries knowledge, but disseminates knowledge on history, culture of India, about India's monuments, and all the things which makes you feel so proud to be Indian. And those who are on Twitter, if you don't follow Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, you don't know what you are missing out. So I'm also thankful to Shri Khitan for your interesting observations, Mr. President. And many thanks to also to all the representatives of the media, both print and electronic, for their presence at the session. And last but not the least, I would like to thank the members of the chamber for making it convenient to attend this special session. And with these words, I would request all of you to join me in carrying a hearty vote of thanks to Shri Sanyal with appreciative acclamation. Thank you.